Who was Hermes?
Well, that's a big question. I think he's probably had many characters through what we would consider our history, through different incarnations. And, a lot of people talk about Enoch, right, being related to Hermes. A lot
Who's
of people.
Enoch?
Okay, so we're going deep now.
Let's go. Yeah, why not?
Okay,
Fuck
so
it.
there's a non-canonical books of the Bible, right? And one of them is called the Book of Enoch. So Enoch tells a story of an antediluvian or pre-diluvian, pre-flood period of time. So like in the period.
And where are these books found? Like where are these non-biblical books found?
So in 325 A.D.,
Council of Nicaea.
Council of Nicaea, exactly. So Constantine, who was also the emperor of Rome at the time, decided to declare himself the pope. And now, if you can't beat him, the Christians at the time, let's join them. Mm-hmm. So let's set the rules for it. We're going to bring together all the bishops and everything, and they looked at it as this is a big spiritual awakening, but we need to make the official sort of statement on these are the books of the Bible. Until that time, there were many, many other books. Mm-hmm. A lot of books didn't make it into this canonization.
Yeah. But where did they go?
They're still around. They're still around. The Gospel of Thomas is another good example of this. Some of them are called the Apocrypha, if you've ever heard of the Apocrypha. So these are like esoteric wisdom teachings that often the Essenes or the Gnostics also held and kept, and for literally thousands of years. So basically, what you find even in Qumran when they had the Dead Sea Scrolls, right? References were made inside of those and the Dead Sea Scrolls to some of these non-canonized books of the Bible.
Mm-hmm. And when you think about the Council of Nicaea, you have to think about an imperial structure that saw that the slave classes loved this new teaching, both for its virtue. Of course, there's so much virtue in the truth of Christianity and the teachings of Yeshua when you can actually look through some of the ways in which the, quote, church has twisted those teachings. But if you looked at the deep core of it, such powerful wisdom, number one. Number two, it started to flip and reverse the power structure because there was just a few wealthy aristocrats and there was tons and tons of poor peasants, proletariat, whatever you wanted to call them. And this religion started to flourish amongst them. Blessed are the meek. It kind of flipped everything on its head, and it was all about the virtue of your inner world, of your heart, of your compassion, of your kindness, of your love, of your service, not the strength of your arm and your armor and your conquering. Yeah. And so it flipped this whole Roman paradigm on its head. So you got an emperor there who's organizing a council and being like, we got to take all these texts and we got to make them work for us. And that alone should give people a little bit of a question about what's in the Bible.
That's right. This doesn't agree with my policies, so this is not going in the Bible. It would be
like if the current government was like, all these spiritual teachings, we got to take what we want and we got to eliminate the rest and say that we're spiritual, right? Like, why would you trust them?
Exactly.
To make the cuts. They're not the right editor. They got a vested interest. They're not unbiased
in fact,
source.
Arguably the opposite, right?
Yeah.
The one that you should be most skeptical of. Well, the Book of Enoch is one of those such books, and you can find tons and tons of references to this all across the internet. You can just type in Book of Enoch. You'll find a bunch of stuff, both from, even rabbinical kind of students and even rabbis themselves who will talk about this, but also in Kabbalah, but also across Christianity and everything. So this is kind of well known. In the Book of Enoch tells a story about Enoch. Now, Enoch was a man who became godlike, okay? And he built a city, and this city, the city of Enoch, became so holy that it transcended this dimension, as it's described in this book. And
so it was the kingdom.
It was like a kingdom, right? It would be kind of comparable,
the kingdom, like the way
maybe like a Shambhala.
Yeah.
Right? Maybe like a Shambhala, like a spiritual domain. And so he sort of transcended these things. Now, a lot of people, myself included, believe that Enoch came back in several incarnations, right? And this was Hermes Trismegistus, also referred to in the Egyptian pantheon as Thoth, right? Also pronounced thought, just like a thought inside your head. In addition, you have other references where it might be that Melchizedek was also one of these incarnations, So you've heard of the keys of Melchizedek.
That's who Paul Selig, who's been on my podcast many times, if he's forced and pressed to give a name to the guides that he's talking to, it's Melchizedek.
Yeah. And Melchizedek means Malkitzedek, right? It's a Hebrew word. You probably know that Jerusalem, right, is like peace, right? Salem, right?
Shalom.
So it's like shalom, right? It's like peace be with you, kind of a concept, the way we say shalom. And Jerusalem, and when you talk about Abraham paid tithes to the chief priest at the time, and he went to visit him, lived in Salem, and his name was Malkitzedek. And Malki means king, right? Like Melech, or even the name Malek in Indian, right? In Hindu, means king also. So it is like ancient stuff through etymology that's gone all over the place. Tzedek also can mean like justice or peace. So
The king of peace.
yeah, like the king of peace and justice in a way, say it like that. So basically, you have this personage who is reincarnated through time and always brought with that incarnation lots of wisdom.
So now when we say incarnation, some people can have a very literal, linear way that you look at this, right? But fundamentally, but you can have your own unique body and your own unique configuration. Of course you do. You have different flesh and different things. You could even be a different, potentially, iteration of something, but actually tap into the current and the frequency, because in those non-physical dimensions, as I understand them through all of my journeys and through all of my studies, things are recorded in vibrations, and these vibrations you have the ability to access. So like Paul Selig can access the vibration of Melchizedek and allow that vibration
Channeling.
to channel through, right? So there's a lot of ways that when we say incarnation, it doesn't mean like I was fucking Marcus Aurelius in a past life or something.
Although you would have made a very good Marcus Aurelius.
Thanks, Robert.
I could see
That's
you in that
it's
breastplate
an
and
unnecessary
everything.
compliment,
Yeah.
but I will accept. I will fucking accept. But nonetheless, like so when you think about this, just think about somebody who's tapping into, at the very least, the energy of what the vibrational signature and collected intelligence of this being that we call Hermes might be.
And that could very well be the case too. But there are certain signatures. And throughout Scripture, we see references to people getting keys, right? We've all heard about the keys of Peter, the keys of Melchizedek, right? The keys of Enoch. There's a book called The Keys of Enoch as well by J.J. Hurtak that's worth reading if you're interested to learn more about this. And I remember when we first met via text, I think I asked you if you were into Hermeticism the very first time as well. And you hadn't yet read Kybalion. And then when we talked at the last time, you're like, I just read Kybalion. It was like, whoa.
Yeah.
That was like, wow. And I feel like there is this frequency, maybe it's a frequency connection, it might be an incarnation connection, that ties several of these people throughout history together, right? Where we see these kind of keys of Solomon, another man of great wisdom who I know you've studied a lot about as well. So, and they all have sigils as well, which is kind of interesting. So there's kind of a different meaning.
I think I'm wearing David's sigil on my...
Yeah, you've got a Star of David, which
my,
also originates
necklace.
with, as well, with that turned into Seal of Solomon as well. So I think there's some depth to this. And this concept of, even as recently as someone like Saint Germain, right? You may have heard of Saint Germain.
The violet purple flame.
Exactly.
Of Saint
So
Germain.
Saint Germain was this very interesting character from like the 18th century that everyone thought lived for possibly hundreds of years even. He was very charismatic. He could hold a conversation, but he never ate at dinner. He was always...
Maybe that's why he looks so old.
And he was, well, he never aged though. That's the thing.
Yeah.
He didn't age, and that's what people claim about him. And he was, you'll find him throughout history, like involved in things like the American Revolution. He's like showing up in different places. It's like, how could he have been at all these different places?
Like the movie Highlander.
Exactly. He's like the movie Highlander. And this guy's really interesting because he speaks many languages, right? He's extremely charismatic. And people thought he must be a charlatan because he couldn't possibly have done all the things that he seems to have known and done in his lifetime.
Yeah.
Because he had to live many lifetimes. So there's all kinds of huge lore around this guy. A lot of people believe that, again, tapping into that same frequency or possibly incarnation of Thoth, of Hermes.
Also, that traces potentially all the way to Saint Germain, is what you're saying. It could
Yes.
be, so it could go Enoch, it could go, Thoth, it could go
Melchizedek.
Hermes, Melchizedek,
Solomon.
Hermes, all of these different characters in a different iteration, articulation. And one of the teachings of Solomon and the teachings of like the deep mystical Kabbalah and Torah is that we all have the potential to actually merge our own will and consciousness with divine will. But it's not that we become effaced. It's not that we lose everything that makes us unique. We actually subsume, like the divine moves through us as us, integrated as us. And so what we see through our lens and our perspective and our portal actually supersedes any text that had gone before, because it's the right information for this time in this context. As we all know, if you give advice out of context, it could be pretty fucking useless. Sometimes it's universal, sometimes it's of the wrong time. And so this idea that you can always rewrite the Torah, rewrite the scripture, if you're able to step into your own highest divine consciousness as you, not just the divine somewhere neutral, but the divine as you, then you actually can deliver a message, which is why all of these messages, even if it is the same being or the same frequency, could seem quite different because it was specifically filtered through the lens of that person at that time in that specific way. But the information, of course, is going to be different because it's going to be serving and meeting the need of exactly the people and the place that he was occupying.
I fully agree. And, it kind of reminds me of the sixth Hermetic principle, which is cause and effect. That every cause has an effect and every effect has a cause. It's all
Everything
sort of
has
connected.
its cause and its effect. Chance is
Exactly.
but a name for law not recognized.
Exactly. And that's how I feel about randomness. I don't believe in randomness. Right? Randomness is just our inability to perceive God's patterned encryption.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's there.
Yeah.
I don't care what the number sequence is. I've always been able to find patterns in it if I really deeply look. But, we talked about this last time. What is randomness? It's just a boundary condition where our knowledge ends and our ignorance begins. And as we expand human consciousness, we push the boundary out further and further. And that expands probably at something like the speed of light. Interesting that the universe is expanding about that same speed too. Maybe it's just our consciousness.